Football Fever, and for the first time we're going to start a new episode on Chubba TV, Where Are They Now? And for the first episode ever, we've got a man who everyone knows in Australian football quite well, a man who's played a big role with Australian football, especially with a club here in Sydney, a club that I grew up with, Sydney Olympic. It's my pleasure to have on Chubba TV this afternoon, Peter Raskopoulos. Peter, good evening. Good. It's been a long time. It's great catching up. Firstly, how you been? You're looking good, so you're looking great. All right, so yeah, we started this Chubba TV, Where Are They Now? And like I said, a lot of people asked when I asked for some names, your name came up quite a lot. So I only asked you the other day, and I'm glad you gave us the time today for this interview. Really appreciate it. You were born in Greece in 1962, migrated here in Australia when you were 2 years old, and you started playing your football with Elwood Wanderers. But at the tender age of 15 years old, you made your debut for one of the biggest powerhouses club in Australian football, Sydney Olympic. I mean, that is a huge achievement, Pete, at 15 years old.
Reflecting back on it, obviously it is, but it happened so quickly in the sense that Sydney Olympic, and from there I was playing in the thirds because they had third division, second division, and obviously the first team. And I think it was in a matter of 18 months or so that I made my first grade debut.
I mean, I coach now, and at 15 years old, you watch them play under 15s, and, you know, a lot of kids are still immature, but to play for one of the powerhouses at 15 years old, it was the 1977, in the inaugural season of the NSL. I think only Nicky Cole came later, and I think was a little bit younger than you, if that is correct.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I know Nicky played around that age, and I think Chris Calantis around that age. So there was a few 15 and 16-year-olds that had made the NSL.
Moving forward after that, back in 1981, which was probably one of your highlights of your career, I mean, you even captained the Socceroos in a game against Indonesia, but most of all, you captained the under-20s FIFA World Cup, and you had that great win against Argentina in the quarter-final. I mean, that's a huge achievement. From 15 years old, only 4 years later, you captained both the Socceroos and also the under-20s. Young Australian team as well.
Yeah, that was a great moment. Proud moment for obviously myself, my family, and obviously the people that have helped me get there. Because, you know, with every aspect of life, when we climb the ladder, you know, there's a lot of people around us, or people that helped us get there, and, you know, I was no different to anyone else. So, you know, it was a proud moment, not only myself, but a lot of people around me. You
were described as, you know, as I could say, a Michel Platini, a real creative midfielder back in the day. What would you describe as your best attribute through your playing career?
Look, I was a good reader of the game. I was probably a step ahead in a way, if that's the right word to use, and I was a good passer of the ball. So I was very much attacking minded. So that was you know, just something that came naturally to me, I suppose.
I mean, you played with a lot of big name players like yourself, Peter Raskopoulos, Chris Calantis, and so on. Sydney Olympic had a great team. I think you won the NSL Cup twice back then. But can you give us a real feel? How big was Sydney Olympic back then in the Greek community, and what was the pressure like for yourself, and how big was back then playing for Sydney Olympic?
Huge, because huge in the sense that it was totally different to what is today. I mean, in a sense of your parents supported you, like all parents do, but, you know, they were too busy out working. We didn't have advisors around us. I quickly realised that Sydney Olympic was, I don't know the right word, the icon of the Greek community throughout Australia. I'd go to Perth and things like that. And I was still very young. I was still, 17, 18, 19 in those. You could make a week for someone, or you could destroy their week, whether you win or lose. And it was amazing. I mean, I'd go to church, and the priests, the majority of Greek priests were soccer fans. So there was Sydney Olympic fans throughout the whole of Australia, and it was pressure. There was pressure. Overall, we tried to enjoy it as much as we could.
Yeah, you played in the days at Pradhan Park, St George Stadium, so it was always full house when Sydney Olympic were playing. So, like you said, it was a lot different back then to where it is right now. But your career, like I said, you had 15 caps, I believe, for the Socceroos, 15 international caps. You also went overseas to Panathinaikos. Can you tell us a little bit about your time and how, your stint overseas, and probably, you probably didn't go as good as you hoped or could have gone better?
We were the Australian under-20 team. We were playing in Israel, and we played against Greece. And that's where I'm not sure who saw me from Panathinaikos, and they invited me over. Originally, I signed a contract with a guy that at that time was one of the sons of the Rebranding or Yanni family, and they'd given him the presidentship of Panathinaikos to keep him away from the oil deal, because the family was huge in the tanker industry and doing oils, and apparently he was a bit of a hothead and screw up a few of the deals. So they said, you go and look after the soccer team. But to me, he was a gentleman, because what happened was I'd signed a contract. And anyway, I sort of went to him and then I said, look, well, I didn't go to him. I got Jim Patinellis, who was the president of Sydney Olympic, that got me over there to make the initial contact that I wanted to come back to Sydney Olympic. And basically, I'd signed an agreement that if I went back to Greece, I'd play with Panathinaikos, and that was it. And he was a thorough gentleman, and they'd given me some money up front, and, I'd spent a little bit of money and doing things. So I thought, I've got to give this money back or do it. And you've got to realise I was 18, 19 then. I had no one around me. And anyway, he was a thorough gentleman. He said, no, I gave you the money. That's your money. And, to me, he was a thorough gentleman. He was a great relief that he allowed me, obviously, to go back to the Sydney Olympic. And everything worked out pretty good.
Some of the names that you played with back then, Pete, like I said, in that Sydney Olympic era, Chris Calantzas, Peter Raskopoulos, Jim Ziras, Marshall Soper, nearly all those players you could say should have played overseas, and probably some of the best players we've ever produced in Australian football. What would you say, why were we producing so many big name players back then?
I think we were allowed to express ourselves. I mean, now you're getting on to, for me, a touchy subject, which is junior football. And I think where people don't realise that even though we didn't have the facilities, the structures, the professionalism that we have today, the players were, we were out of football all day as kids. I mean, today, obviously, you've got your technology and everything else. But we're definitely not producing any creative players or the players with the imagination that we were in those years. Now, as you know, I mean, if you've looked at soccer in the last decade, soccer's changed.
100%.
Soccer's changed dramatically. I mean, 10, 15 years ago, the majority of the good quality teams would go up 1-0 and park the bus. Now, the good teams are understanding, well, they need to score a couple of goals to give themselves an opportunity to win the game. So if we go back to how we were producing players, in the last decade, the way juniors are trained and coached, has it changed? I don't think it has. But the game's changed totally. So, we've got a... It's
become very athletic as well. You've got to be a full...
Yeah, I mean, we're I've been out of football for a little while, but at the moment, with a couple of blokes, the way, we might want the younger players to be trained and getting back to the physical side of it, to the strength, the speed, the acceleration, all that. We're looking at all that now. If we think we can do something positive in the next year, we'll do it. We'll go ahead. If we don't, we just had a crack at something and it didn't work out. But, the other sad thing, I mean, you're in football more. What's even sadder is that in the last decade or 2 decades, and you're in football more than I am, because I couldn't name you a league player today. I'm not that interested in that side. More interested in junior, but in your experience, and you're around it all the time, we haven't got a Greek kid, whether it be in the national Matildas, national team. When you named those players, we had, the George Christopoulos, the Theo Salamidis, if you remember.
Yes.
We had Greek boys coming through. Well, there's no more Greek boys that are involved, and I don't think there's any Greek boys in the youth teams either. I might be wrong. I've seen a couple of the squads, and there's no Greek names there. Why?
Well, in the youth now there is. Look, I believe, I know when the A-League stopped, there was a big thing. We lost the youth football, wasn't played for a whole decade, so we are playing catch-up. And I think of late, we're starting to produce a lot of youth again, which is a good sign. But we'll get back to that, because that's another another big topic. Getting back to yourself, 28 years old, where a lot of players are at the peak of their careers. I know you suffered with a lot of injuries and back injuries and so forth. You had to give up the game.
Because I came to fractures in L4 and L5 when I was about 27, 28, somewhere there. And I had osteitis pubis and other things. At that stage, I went and seen a specialist, and what had happened was he said to me virtually I needed surgery. And in those days, it was a 12 to 18 months recovery, and I think I was 28 or 29 something. So, and in those days as well, when you were 31, 32, most people were retiring from football. So virtually the decision was made for me. So I virtually retired reasonably young at that time, very young at this time, but and it was funny because it was the only time I got dirty at the club, because what had happened, I was retired for about 12 or 14 months or 16 months or something, and Frank Arroft approached me from St George. And he said, look, you started young, you do this, I'm going to put you on a program, I want you to come and play for St George. And I've been retired for about a year and a half. He says, and I'm happy if you're going to play just 30 minutes or 45 minutes. So what had happened was George Passalis was the president of the club. I went to him and I said, look, George, there's an opportunity, blah, blah, but I need release from Sydney Olympic, right? And it was just something that I was contemplating. So what I'd done is I started, not so much running, I started training on a treadmill and a training bike and some special course that Frank Arrock and Pedro had organised, George had facilitated for me. So I was training for about a month. So I went to the club thinking, you know, that I won't use the words that I told him. But Passalis put a $40,000 transfer fee on it.
Quite a substantial amount of money back those days. Huge. Well, you were the hottest property, the star player, one of the star players.
Yeah. You know, no one knew that I didn't play 20 minutes or half now anymore. So that sort of put that to bed. But I was retired for a long time.
Was it hard walking away from the game? Do you remember back then? Was it really hard?
No, not for me. No, because I had enough. Because what had happened was I always wanted to perform at my best, and then the last 6 months, because I couldn't train, because every time I'd play, I'd get osteitis pubis and the vertebrae in my back. So, you know, after a Sunday game, the majority of the time I couldn't walk for 2 or 3 days. And then I'd try to get right, train on a Friday, play on a Sunday, and it just wasn't working out. You just couldn't do it. Moving
forward from your playing career, obviously then you've gone into your own business that we'll talk about and stuff that you're doing off, but you did return to football in a manager's way with Mick Hickman in 1989-90. Can you tell us how you ended up becoming, did Mick Hickman contact you or the club, or how did you get involved to become manager of that team, which at the end was Olympic's first championship, as we know, as we beat Marconi 2-0 at Parramatta Stadium?
I wanted to get back into football in some way, and the opportunity came to me. It came through some committee men at Sydney Olympic. Others were in favour of it, others weren't. Others were close to Mick Hickman, others weren't. So there was a bit of an internal, let's say, dispute at that time. And it was offered to me because I think the majority of the board wanted me to be there, and that's how I sort of got in that managerial position, which was okay. And look, we had our struggles throughout the year. We were on the verge of making the semi-finals and the playoffs, and we weren't. And one of the great help that we got to win the championships was a young Greek kid called Steve. I wouldn't say forced, but I suggested that he should be, because he was lightning quick. We need, so basically, I just run as fast as you can, get to the byline and cross the ball, and we had success in a couple of games, and he was a major reason why we won the championship that year.
Well, football is about momentum, and you won it from fifth. So, I mean, we got in there on the last game of the season.
Correct. Yeah.
And then you went on that magic run. A lot of people were saying, oh, Rasko's the football brains, Mick Hickman. I know there was a little bit of, but Olympic did win that championship. Abby Sard, Alistair Edwards, Robbie Hooker, David Barrow. It was just Gary Phillips. It was huge, because 30,000 at Parramatta Stadium, and it was the first time Sydney Olympic won a championship. You must have been over the moon.
We were thrilled. I mean, you're thrilled for the fans. I mean, at the end of the day, when people say to me, you've done this for Olympic, well, Olympic was part of my life. Olympic's done a lot for me. You know what I mean? And I never underestimate what the committee and things like that. Everyone had their own little agendas. Everyone, comes and goes and things like that. But at the end of the day, we were representing the Greek community, whether you were a manager, a player, or or things like that. And with Greek DNA in you, it's proud. It's something that we treasure.
Yeah. After that, in '92, you actually took over Sydney Olympic. Mick Hickman went his way, and you became the coach, full-time coach. You were the main man. You brought back Slacko, our ambassador from overseas, brought him back at Sydney Olympic. Probably was a difficult time at Sydney Olympic. How would you describe that when you went, you were coaching? Is that something that you always wanted to do by yourself?
Made the biggest mistake of my life.
You could have walked the streets back then?
Well, we sold Ned Zelli.
Correct. Record transfer fee.
Record transfer fee, $650,000. And, where the money went is a bit of a different story. So what had happened was, at that time, George Passalis was the president.
Yep.
Steve Kamaz was the general manager. And what had happened at that stage, again, there was a bit of infighting within the committee. George Passalis was very close to Mick Hickman, but Mick Hickman had gone to Sydney, Croatia. And what had happened was, Mick Hickman had taken a lot of the ex-Hakala boys with him at that stage, and they'd all signed up. So when we sold our ambassador, after our ambassador,
Ned Zelli.
I'll never forget, there was $354,000 left in the kitty after we paid the bank. We owed the bank, we owed the tax department, and we had little bills. Who was the boy from the Croatia, the Papua New Guinea boy?
Not Manas Lamon, no.
Yeah, Manas Lamon.
Manas Lamon. I remember you brought in Walter Doney.
Yeah, and but I'd organised another 3 or 4 players. One of the Indigenous boys went to England and played in first. Anyway, I had 4 or 5 players ready to come on top of the other boys that we'd already bought. Anyway, so I go into the office about a week later, and Kamas says, "Oh, look, the deal's fallen through." I said, "Why?" He says, what's the name wanted his money back that he borrowed for a facility. So all of a sudden we had 350. And in the meantime, Hickman, and not only he left off his own accord, he got sacked before a game got started at Croatia. And then George Passalis said to me, we've got to take all the Hakala boys. And then all of a sudden you're forced by the president to take back, and that's why I should have resigned at that time. But anyway, I didn't do myself any favours by taking the job. And in retrospect, as a coach, I probably let myself down a little bit because I had the mentality of, I'm paying you $30,000 a year, which was big money in those days, or $40,000 a year. Why can't you just flick the ball over there? Why can't you pass the ball 40? So I thought, what was coming naturally to, let's say, a Jimmy Patikas or Calantis or a Sopa, come naturally to them.
Yes.
So I was probably expecting more of them than they were capable of doing.
Well, that was pretty much it. From there, we'll move a bit forward because you went out of the game. I mean, you went out of the game for quite a while. Olympic kept on, went through different managers, different boards, different so on. But it came the big time when Olympic were either the 5 white knights that came into the club, or Rene Rifkin. We know that there was that big old deal, but the 5 white knights with Nick Politis, who we all know what a marvellous job he's done in the game, in the NRL and so on, and his business. And Sydney Olympic for the first time became a professional club, full-time professional club, fully run, and you were brought on as a CEO. How did that happen? How did you get approached, or how did that all happen? Okay, yep, of course.
So at that time, I got approached by Jason Hetherington's management to go and see Nick Politis because the Roosters was back to work on the. I want you to come and be CEO of Sydney Olympic, a football manager, whatever you want to call it. And my first words to Nick was, "Nick, I don't work the boards and I don't work the groups."
Was that the first time you met Nick?
No, I'd met Nick after that a couple of times, and I was pretty adamant. I wasn't too keen at that time. Anyway, we sat down, and one lunch that we had together, a couple of lunches that we had, and he wanted me to come on board. He says, "What do you want?" And I'm sure he was referring into, what do you want financially? And I said to him, "Look, if I come on," I said, "you need to guarantee me I'm the boss of football. No decisions. The only one that makes decisions on the football is me, no one else." And I said, "I'm not an expert on marketing. I'm not an expert." And he says, "Deal done." And he went to shake me in. I said, No. We have to have a meeting with all the board members, and I need to hear it from there. Anyway, I'll never forget it. We went to the first board meeting, and they were there, and within a matter of minutes, they were discussing who they wanted as coach. How to do this. He said, no, you sit down, and he told the others to be quiet in different words. And we sort of, agreed to that was going to be the decision, and that's why I came on board.
Well, a couple of things.
It was easy to work with Nick because he didn't understand football obviously that well, but he was a great chairman in sports and all that. But basically, our agreement was I'd do what I had to do to win and just keep him informed, and it worked well.
Well, it would have been. Most people in the EPL now, they answer to one chairman. You had 5 white knights that always probably wanted to put their point of view. So it would have been let's say it would have been tough at times, but you probably knew how to handle them. You knew how to get yourself around, and it worked well. But it's a key time in Sydney Olympics history and legacy because a couple of things happened back then. Before we get into, we won our second championship, and we're going to get into that. There was a lot of talk about Olympic football was struggling. NSL was always struggling. Clubs were always trying to find money. People were trying to, make the game more professional. And there was a lot of talk with yourself about Leeds United taking over Sydney Olympic, which became very big. It was a big thing. And also about Olympic moving in the Sutherland Shire region, which had the biggest association at the time, and becoming the Olympic Sharks, which till now is probably, for some Greeks, there's still a bit of a sour taste to it or whatever. We'll get into it. But how did the Leeds proposal come, and how close was there ever Leeds really getting involved with Sydney Olympic firstly?
What had happened was Leeds' approach came from Harry Kuehl's manager, Bernie Manning. And Bernie and Nick, used to have lunch on a regular basis on certain other aspects of whatever you want to call it. But today, the lead offer came away a little bit, and Nick, that if Leeds United take over, I'm not interested because I was there for Sydney Olympic.
Yep.
Do you know what I mean? I was there for the Greeks, and I wanted to turn our club into the best footballing club in the country. So it was a possibility, and it was 50-50 on many. Sometimes it was going to happen, other times like there was no hope. At one stage, the majority of the owners wanted it to happen because there was money involved enough. But like I said, I wasn't in those discussions because when Nick asked me to opinions and there was other meetings, I said I really don't want to be involved. And I made it quite clear to the board. I made it quite clear to Nick. I made it quite clear to Bernie because at the end of the day, I wasn't there for the money for Sydney Olympic. Sydney Olympic wasn't feeding my family. I still had my businesses. I was running everything else and things like that. So
when Olympic moved to Shark Park, forget about we won the champion, we'll get into that. Did you start noticing maybe it was a good move, or did you start noticing maybe that, I know crowds sort of were dropping off anyway, but the league was dropping off in crowds anyway. But in hindsight, is it something you think would do again, or probably it was the wrong move for Sydney Olympic at the time?
It's a hard question to answer because we moved there thinking that we could attract your audience, we could attract more fans and more, and we thought at that stage there was some thinking that we're not going to survive just on the Greek support.
Yep.
That stage, I got an inkling that we need to broaden our base because what was going to happen in a couple of years' time, glory, going backwards and forwards, what was the right decision? Now, whether it was the right decision or wrong decision, it's hard to say, but it was something that.
Were all the owners behind going there, or they were like it was it hard convincing them, or it was pretty much everyone? No, you were all united on it.
Everyone was a choice that was look, I think that's a good idea. And it was like, well, okay, like I said, it was go forward with it. I mean, my main objective, I didn't care where we played. My main objective was getting winning teams, set up the club for long term and move forward.
Well, you did. You signed Jade North, Wayne Choi. You done a tremendous job, and Nick Politis. I mean, getting the backing of all the owners because you had one of the youngest squads, I believe, at that time that ever won the competition. So we'll get in. We were the youngest team that won the competition in 2001, 2002. Two big things happened that season. Firstly, before a ball was kicked, which involved myself and yourself, we had Branko Cellino as the manager going to lead us into Olympic Sharks. And unfortunately, I'd done that interview with him, and it didn't sit right with the owners and yourself, and for that reason we parted ways with Branko Chelina, and you decided to bring Gary Phillips. What was the Gary Phillips, who really didn't coach at all at that stage in NSL? What was the thinking about, Branko going and bringing in the likes of Gary Phillips when, it was already a big move? It was only like a week before the competition started.
How can I explain this? I don't think at that stage there was great coaches around the country, right? And certain coaches, in certain ways, lose the dressing room, lose the players. And I thought at that time I'd convinced the board that if we're going to build a team, we need to start with youth. We need some experienced players. We had, bought Bolton, if you remember.
Yeah, Clint Bolton, Jade North, Wayne.
We had a good solid spot, so we could introduce 5 or 6 young kids around them, like a Shroy, a North, Greg Owens, Nicky Carl was there.
Correct.
He was already there.
Andrew Packer.
Yeah, so at the end of the day, what we did was we built a squad that I said to the board, I'm travelling from Summer Hill to Shark Park. I want to be entertained, even though I'm the manager. I want to be entertained. So we introduced what I thought was, a good quality team and good quality football.
In saying like that team, I want to talk about a little bit about, was Troy Halpin probably the best player we've ever come across, and he's probably one of the best midfielders this country has. Boy, he should have had a bigger career.
Yeah, look, Troy was a magnificent player. And, everyone told me, including some people from Perth, don't touch him. But, people don't realise that if you treat human beings, everyone's different. If you treat human beings correctly with respect and a little bit of dignity, you'll get the best out of it. At the end of the day, you've got 22 players. Everyone's got a huge ego. Everyone thinks they should be playing on the day. The respect that you treat them. Well, we really turned it into a family club with the players. Players love the club. That's why you can't succeed in football or any sport if the players don't love the club.
I've got to give you credit, Rasko, because as you know, when you I give you big credit in that you were one of the first that I think tried to unite the fans and the players, like you said, a family club. As you know, we travelled to all the away games, and we were playing with yourself, and we were doing those fans games and so on, and you were always giving yourself time, and the players were always giving themselves time. So I think it was like, and that was the time with no social media at all, we got to remember. So it was absolutely, it was a great time at the club. I loved that time then. You remember, it was one of the best moments.
We got to respect the people that are paying the money to go through the gates. Everyone says that without fans you haven't got a club. That's a fact. Do you know what I mean? So you got to respect that. Even in my playing day, I used to love the fans because I was either getting cheered, I was the king, or I was getting abused and booed. Yeah. And there was no in between. But I loved that.
100%. You live for it.
Strange or weird.
No, you live for it.
It's a drug.
100%. That's right. You walk the coffee shops, you have free coffee, free food the next week. No one wants to know.
I used to young age, and they're all normal. The fans sometimes used to be a little bit tentative in approaching players and things like that. So we try to be sociable with the fans.
Well, the biggest thing happened in Australian football, it's not going to happen again the way we set up Australian football here. And I want to know, were you the mastermind behind it, Gary Phillips? Who was the mastermind? Because Olympic done something, and that showed, like you said, you wanted to win the competition, and it's like maybe what a Man City or Chelsea do now. When you want to win the competition, you go get the best. I remember coming close to the last 7-10 rounds, whatever was left before Olympic. We were struggling scoring goals. We probably had a bit of an issue up front. And Peter Raskopoulos, out of nowhere, when we first heard of it, we all thought, there's no way this is happening. Contact Sydney United at the time, a young Ante Milicic back from overseas, scoring a lot of goals at Sydney United. And we paid $110,000 transfer fee back then and brought Ante across to Sydney Olympic, which turned out to be, he scored the winning goal in the grand final and silenced Subiaco, as we know the story goes. But how did that happen? And who even thought about approaching Sydney United? They probably were loving it because there was big money for them, but that was a huge transfer back then, and what a move.
It's a funny story, Joe. So what had happened was we'd go to board meetings and, and I don't say this a bad way, but we'd have a couple of the directors whinging or spending too much money. So what had happened was, I hadn't said anything, but I think it was with about 11 rounds to go, I approached Sam Prislovich, who was Sydney, Croatia,
Correct.
Venice, and
he's still involved with the MacArthur A-League team currently.
Correct. I said, us Wogs have got to stick together. I said, there's a good chance in the next 2 or 3 weeks that you guys have got no chance of making the semi-finals. I said, when that time comes, I said, I don't care whether it's a loan or you want to sell him, I want Milicic. So that was a discussion that we had. I think it was on a Tuesday. And if you remember, Chubb, we were playing some great...
100%.
But we weren't scoring goals.
Yeah.
So I hadn't said anything to Nick or the rest of the board. So that was on a Tuesday that this idea came into my head, and I went to Sam and had a discussion. He said, look, we'll talk in the next week or two. I said, all right. So on that Saturday, I'm sitting with Nick and we're watching the football, and Nick had a great mate called Terry. He was at Chelsea. He was a Chelsea fan. And Nick, at stage, I think it was halfway through the game or in the second half, Nick goes, unbelievable, playing some good football. Terry's raving how good a football we're playing, blah, blah, blah. And Nick turns around and says, mate, we need a striker that can score some goals. Well, I've never been so excited in my life. And I said, Nick, I've been working on something. He says, what? I said, mate, there's a chance we might be able to get the striker. And it was funny because Branko Colina tried to get Ante Milicic to sing the Olympic year or when he was coaching when I wasn't there. So you can imagine that...
Attention.
Don't say anything to Branko. So anyway, I've approached without Sam, without anyone knowing, and I had a coffee with him. I was picking up my youngest daughter, Brighton, there at girls' school. And I said, A, B, C, D, E, if you're not interested, I'm not going ahead with it. I want to know if you're interested. And he said to me, yes, I would be interested. I said, we'll make it, whether it be on a loan or a transfer fee. I said, I'll make it happen. I said, I'll promise. So I said to Nick, look, if people start finding out, people will start, trying to destroy this too. I said, we've got to keep it quiet. He says, you just go get it. I said, all right. So anyway, it was funny, because he was taking the piss out of me because it happened over 3 or 4 days. And Nick said, we're signing. I said, not yet, Nick. And Nick, taking the piss out of me, says, mate, do you want me to help you? Just, I was getting angry at him because I'm getting frustrated now. So what happened was, we'd done the deal with Croatia. We were going to pay them $110,000, but the deal got even more complicated because Croatia wanted the money, the check, in Sydney, Croatia. The president wanted Sydney, Croatia, because at that time the system was the transfer fee goes to Soccer Australia.
Yep.
They take a cut. But what happened was Croatia owed him fees or something to Soccer Australia for $140,000, $150,000. So Croatia weren't going to get any money.
No.
Anyway, so I decided to take the punt and give Croatia the check. Get all the transfer papers done. So I've gone now, I think it was a Wednesday, to lodge the papers with Soccer Australia. And Despina was down at Soccer Australia and Stephen Kamaz was the CEO.
Yes.
Anyway, so I knew that I had to pay Soccer Australia, but Sydney Croatia wouldn't do the deal unless I gave them the check. All right, I'll take the punt. Anyway, she says, look, this is what's got to happen, and this is... Otherwise, the player's not going to register. The money's got to come there. I said, Despina, I'm going to lose my job. Regulation, blah, blah, blah. And I don't know what I'm trying to con Despina. And then she says to me, no, it won't happen. I said, please get Stefan on the phone. Anyway, Stefan wouldn't return me calls. So I go into Soccer Australia on Thursday. And I said, I've got to get this deal done. So I go to Soccer Australia on Thursday. Stefan says, no, I can't do it. Despina's going, no, I can't do it. I said, Despina, can you please leave the room? I said, I really need to speak to Stefan. Anyway, I said to Stefan, look, Stefan, we've been friends for years. I'm going to lose my job over this. I didn't know these were the rules and regulations. Surely you can change the situation. Anyway, I went back to a little bit of history that we knew about ABC, me and Stefan. And anyway, that afternoon they signed off on the deal. Do you know what I mean? So that's how
Wow. Well, it was a masterstroke, like we said. He got us through that semi-final series. Heading into that grand final, Subiaco, I mean, we had a lot of injuries. Troy Halpern, Ante Juric done his arm. Despite everything, it was a marvellous win. We won 1-0. I remember his comments. I put the ball where the spiders live and so on. The celebrations back when you came back, Pete, and everything. Were you amazed at how big that was?
When you win championships, the celebration's great for the players and the management and the coaching and everything like that. But in a lot of ways, it's the relief. So you remember we went to Paul Afkos's
Correct.
there to celebrate.
Yep.
And I'm sure
Yeah, I was there.
got on the
Yeah.
midnight
plane to come back.
And I remember, I spent that afternoon and made me way to Shark. And
even the airport was pretty busy.
Yeah, and the airport was busy, yeah. But what happened at Shark Park, there was thousands and thousands of fans. And if you remember, they were replaying
the game. Yeah.
The president at that time at Shark Park came to find me with the security and said, "You've got to stop the fans jumping up and down." They were scared the building was. You know what I mean? But there was thousands of Olympic fans. It was joyous because it was great that we gave our supporters so much joy.
It was unbelievable. I still, I get goosebumps every time I think about it. It was just, 40,000 people, the way it happened, the way it was incredible. And the following year, we tried to go back to back. We were minor premiers. And like Sydney Olympic in all their history, there's always something with coaches. Unfortunately, for whatever reason, you thought Gary Phillips wasn't the right man to move us into the semi-final series, and we brought in Lee Sterry. That must have been hard because you were very close as well as a personal friend with Gary as well, and he just won the championship. It's it's pretty hard to say, well, we've got to let you go just before a semi-final series.
Yeah, well, it was a little bit before the semi-final series, but I think at that time it was the right decision. In a sense that there was a little bit of discontent in the dressing room, so it was a difficult decision. But I thought to myself, if I stay true to myself, and it goes back to when I said to Nick, I'll take the job as long as I'm the boss of football. But I made a decision then because when I go back a bit, when I was coaching, I said to you it was the wrong decision. I made the wrong decision because I try to keep everyone happy.
Yep.
And obviously with hindsight, it wasn't the right decision when I was coaching. But when I came into football side, when I became the CEO, I said to myself, if I need to be ruthless, I will be ruthless. And it was a ruthless decision. It was a hard decision, but at that time I thought it was the right decision.
How when you look at the owners and so on, I mean, they were all passionate. I suppose we didn't hear much of Nick Politis back then. Like he's not a man that does many interviews and so on. Can you really tell us how much passion? Like we know how much he loves the Roosters, but how much did Sydney Olympic take to him as well?
I hope I'm not talking out of school. And, if he hears this, he might get upset with me and ring me and abuse me. But I think in a funny way, he grew to love Sydney Olympic, and I think he grew to love his Greek roots. And he was ecstatic when we won the grand final in Perth. He was ecstatic when we were
minor premiers the year after.
And he did. He had a lot of passion. He certainly vented me because it was another story. I don't know if you know, because after the first grand final, I think 3 or 4 weeks after that, because it was taking a toll on me quite a lot because it was a 24/7 job.
Yes, I was going to get to it. Yeah, no, but that's all right. You've done it for me. Keep going.
So what happened was, like I said, I mean, Sydney, I'll help them get another good football manager or CEO. They've got what I thought was the best squad, the youngest squad, and it proved right because, what I'm really proud of was, I think in 2000, when Sydney Olympic, we finished in 2003, I think in 2015, from that squad. Did you
get any inkling that the owners as well were ready to move on?
No, well, the owners weren't ready to move on. The only thing the owners wanted to do at that stage was cut back a little bit on the budget. The owners didn't want to move on. I mean, with all due respect, right, and I don't see that this is in a critical way. You've got to understand, owners of football clubs become prominent. All right, Nick's in a different league, right? I'm asking you, when Tony Sage took over Perth, who knew Tony Sage?
Nobody.
It was worth 600 million. No one knew it. Nick, the same as Perth, and our owners, with all due respect.
Correct.
They were very successful business, great in what they did, and good quality human beings. But before they took Sydney Olympic over, who knew them?
Correct.
You know what I mean? So it becomes like, you're kicking in a few dollars, but
they were enjoying the limelight of it as well.
Yeah, they were always grumbling, moving on, doing this, doing that, but they had the opportunity to move on. They didn't, because they loved it, and it was passionate, and they were doing something great for the Greek community. So what happened was, at that stage, I sent Nick a fax, and his rang me up straight away, and Robin, and she says to me, "Are you sure you want me to send this to Nick?" I said, "Yeah, Robin." And I was close to Robin. Robin was a great lady. And she said, "Oh, look, I don't think Nick's going to be happy. It's down in Melbourne, big port convention." Anyway, I said, "No, send it. I'll talk to Nick. I'll sort it out. Don't worry." She says, "Okay." Nick Politis rings me within 10 minutes. I'll never forget, I'm down at Summer Hill Cafe there with you on. And you know, sometimes you don't feel like talking to people. You don't want to pick them. You're just not in the mood. So I rang out once, I rang out twice. The third time I said, "Just pick up the phone and talk to him." And I said, "All right." So I picked up the phone. Chubba, he verbally abused me for about 3 minutes and 22 seconds. I'm serious. He said to me, "Again, Gumba, do you want me to put on a tracksuit and go coach the team? It's got nothing to do with you. You know, it's been, long, 24/7, this and this and this and that." I said, "It's got nothing." He kept abusing me. Anyway, he says, "You be in my office on Monday," and he hanged up. Jesus Christ, what was that? Like, I had a good relationship. 3 minutes later, he rings me back up. And I pick up the phone, Chubba, and in the most angelic voice, he says to me, "Mate, is your health all right?" So he thought he could be abusing me and I could be resigning because something's wrong with my
Correct.
health.
Yes.
You know what I mean? I said, "Mate, my health's fine." And he says to me, "F," and he hanged up again. Anyway, so I go to his office on Monday and I'm trying to convince him, "Mate, it's got nothing to Nick on blah, 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 blah." Anyway, he's convinced me that we'll stay another year together and we'll move on together. And that was the deal that we done.
How hard was it when you seen the owners eventually moved on, like you said, you moved on, and it was the last year of the NSL. We've seen most of the team was ripped apart, and most of them went to Parramatta Power, which became like the Sydney Olympic. They were probably the powerhouse and had the financial backing at the time, and they brought in most of the players, and they ended up losing to Perth anyway in the final. But and looking where Sydney Olympic ended up going back to Jubilee, and it was the last season, did you have an inkling that it was going to, firstly, the NSL was about to finish?
Oh, we knew that.
But you didn't know it was going to happen 12 months later.
I knew that whether it was going to happen in a year or 2 years' time, I thought there was no future. One of the saddest days that I had in my football career is when we announced it to the players, and then we had a luncheon down at Lasanne's restaurant, and anyway, everyone spoke and things like that, and players were crying.
Because, like you said, it was a big family club.
Oh yeah, players were crying that we were, and I felt bad. I felt guilty in many ways. But I said to Nick, "There's no future going forward," because I knew what they wanted to do. You know what I'm saying? So, and we had players crying and things like that, and then you might know a little bit because my memory's not great. At that time, the members wanted to take over Sydney Olympic because what had happened was the other three owners in Drivas, Balayonis and Matthew Lapouris had agreed with the members they would stay on.
Yeah, they were saying they were going to stay on.
Correct. And what happened was it was quite, well, everyone knew that I'm moving on, everyone knew that Nick was moving on. So then, and I'm reasonably close to Matthew Lapouris, in the sense that they rang me up, the people that were staying on, said, "Oh, we're going to stay on, we're going to do A, B, C, D, and E, but we need to move some players." And I think that stage, I said, "All right." They said, "Oh, we want you to move the players." And I thought to myself, well, look, I'm not going to do that. And I think you might know this better than me. I think I introduced a couple of those players and what should happen to your mate, Tony Rallis. Things like that, because I didn't want to be seen as tearing the team apart. There were decent wages and things like that, but we were probably the fourth highest paying team. We had Perth in that stage, used to pay the players in that thing. And what happened? I think it was about a month or 6 weeks. A couple of the old owners came to me and says, "Oh, it's not as easy as we thought it was." And I think at that stage they pulled the plug. Is that right?
Correct.
It's not great.
Yeah.
And then the members took over.
Well, the members took over, yeah, and I mean, Greg Gav came in with the committee. I mean, like I said, it was the last year of the NSL. It was very hard. The team was Peter Papanakitis was brought in. A lot of players ended up coming from the state league. It was a very hard time for the fans because you've gone from being like the Ferrari or the Rolls Royce of the league, and we were back to being like a mini minor. So it was a hard, but and then it was sad. The NSL finished at the end of the season, and the A-League started. Before we go, I know we've spoke a lot, but there's just a couple more things I want to go through. Before we go into the A-League and that, 2016 was a great time for you as well, I suppose, for you personally. Must have been a huge thrill being inducted in the Hall of Fame, 81. That must have been, something that meant a lot for yourself. It still does.
Yeah. It's always great to be acknowledged. Always great to have a pat on the back. So it was a proud moment. But like I said, we're pretty normal people. We were just. I tell kids today, when they say, or when they feel a little bit overawed when they meet football people or any other people, I said, at the end of the day, we're in a job where we get publicity. The only difference when I speak to kids, your dad might be the best mechanic, but he doesn't get publicity. At the end of the day, we're normal people. Yeah. You know what I mean? But getting accolades like that in your profession is always, proud moments.
Pete, I don't want to get too far into it, but you made a comment earlier, and I felt sad, like when you said, I don't even know I can't even tell you an A-League player right now. So when we think about yourself and the career you've had to Australian football and how much time you've gave to the game, I feel like it's sad, and you're not the only one. Like, how many people got lost to the game? I know with the A-League, is it something that, what made you really walk away from the game and not even have an interest in the A-League?
On the personal side, when the A-League first started, I think Lowy was good. He generated a lot of money, which helped in marketing and everything. I got a bad taste when we went to get the A-League license with Nick and Matthew Lapouris. So we had meetings with them to get the A-League license.
Yeah, I remember the name, Sydney Blues.
So we had a front, talking about, why we should get the A license. And Matt Carroll and John O'Neill, they've never seen a soccer ball in their life. Matt Carroll said to me, "Oh, well, you've got to give me a squad of players and coaches, whatever you want to do. We've got to approve it." I said, "What?" He says, "Yeah, we've got to approve everything." I said, "So if I want to put a squad together, the players that I want, or the coach that I want, you've got to approve. We just won championships." And I said, "You've got no idea." And anyway,
and it changed.
Below we rang up Nick and said, "Look, we're going to," because John O'Neill, I think, was shafted by the rugby union. So he didn't want Sydney FC to be a powerhouse and owned by one person, which would have been Nick Politis.
Yeah.
Who virtually controls rugby league. So you can imagine the power he would have with the A-League. So anyway, they tried to convince Nick to take 25% together with the New South Wales Soccer Federation and some other 25. And they did tell Nick that there's no way that Sydney FC would employ me.
Yeah.
Right? Because they didn't want that ethnic, they didn't want this and that. And to Nick's credit, Nick said, "Well, look, I make the decisions. People don't make the decisions for me, even though I own 25%. So that left a bit of a bad taste in his mouth. I can understand. At the end of the day, when I was at Olympic, I wanted to be the boss. I wanted to make the decisions. So I can understand Lowy or John O'Neill. I just didn't agree with him. But what I lost interest was because they weren't nurturing the youth going forward. And, everyone tells me about the success of the A-League. The A-League's a total failure. You know it better than I do. Since the A-League started, the clubs have lost over 800 million between them. Since the A-League started, after the first year, crowds are down. Have a look at their TV rights. They weren't producing young players. So
well, to be fair, I think now, like I said, in recent times, I think now we're starting to send a lot of players back overseas. And they average 8,500. If you look at overall, I understand there's a lot of problems in the A-League, and I agree with you. At the time, the biggest mistake they've done, they divided the game into new and old, and now they're trying to merge it back together, which is going to take time and it's difficult. But it's just sad when I see a lot of, like I said, great people like yourself.
I believe as you're growing or you're moving on, you have different loves in life. I've got 4 great kids, and now I'm a babysitter.
Yeah.
I do a bit of travel and I babysit. So it's not that, there's a little bit of interest that I read headlines.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Really proud of Dillis, the success
Arthur Dillis. Yeah.
A Greek boy that's had great success. And this is why when a few of the Greek boys have success, it's sort of, I have a bit of interest.
Yeah.
Otherwise,
where is Peter Raskopoulos these days? I know back then you were still fanatical with the AFL and the Sydney Swans.
You still the world, but at the end of the
Well, you've had a colourful career. You've had an interesting career, Pete. It's been wonderful. I mean, time's running up for us today, but, it's just great catching up with you. Like I said, you've always gave me the time. You've always give people your time. And, it's a wonderful piece of our history and like you said, the memories we'll cherish forever. And that's the beauty of the game. We have all those memories to cherish for the rest of our lives. And one thing that football's brought is friendships and united a lot of people. And that will take, we can't give the game back enough for what the games gave to us.
Correct. The game's given us a lot, especially my club, Milicic, gave me a lot in life. And I'm forever grateful.
Thank you again, Pete, for your time today. Appreciate it. And we'll catch up for lunch. And, mate, you're number one. Where are they now? You were the first episode. So hopefully this takes off. Just remember you were number one.
Well, at the end of the day, you can only improve from here. So
correct.
Right for each other.
Thanks, champion.